What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about deductive reasoning. Let's go ahead and let's get started. So what is deductive reasoning and what's the difference between deductive and inductive? So for starters, inductive reasoning, as we covered in a previous video, has to do with solving things and finding the next pieces to something by using patterns or past events. Deductive reasoning is the process of reasoning using given and previously known facts to reach a logical conclusion. Basically, you use logic. Deductive reasoning is more based on logic, using given information to logically find what's the next piece. Now, in inductive reasoning and conditional statements, I talked about truth tables and if-then statements. In this video, we can see a truth table here for deductive reasoning, whereas it's a little different than the truth tables we've covered before. The way deductive reasoning actually works is we use and we assume that the conditional is true, and we assume that the conclusion is true. Depending on whether that's true or false, that'll determine whether or not our hypothesis is a true statement. So it works a little backwards, where in this time the truth value of our hypothesis is going to depend on the truth value of our conditional and our conclusion. Again, if none of that made sense to you, hopefully you understand it a little later. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off by showing you, here's an example of how deductive reasoning works versus inductive reasoning. So in this example, normally for the video that we did on inductive reasoning, we were seeing problems based on, hey, here's the pattern, find the next terms to it. Well, now in this case, this is more of an example of how a problem where I need to use deductive reasoning. I need to use logic to find whether or not this statement is true. So the first piece of this statement says, if two adjacent angles form a right angle, then the angles are complementary. So let's go ahead and let's first look at each of these statements individually. Again, this first statement after the if would be my hypothesis, what we normally refer to as P. And this last piece right here, then the angles are complementary, would be my Q. This is my conclusion. So let's first talk about, what is the hypothesis saying? The hypothesis is saying that I have two adjacent angles that form a right angle. So for those of you that may not know, let's talk about what adjacent angles are. So here in this diagram, there are three different angles. Call this one angle 1, angle 2, and we have angle 3. So adjacent angles are angles that are touching each other, that are right next to each other. We have angle 1 and 2, which are adjacent. We have angle 2 and 3 that are adjacent. So angle 1 and 3 cannot be adjacent because they're not touching each other. Now, a right angle, in case you forgot, is usually denoted with a little sort of square. In this case, it's this orange square. And right angles basically mean that they form a 90-degree angle. So I have two adjacent angles. That means two angles are touching each other, and they are forming a 90-degree angle. So now let's look at our conclusion, and let's see those which says that the angles are complementary. Well, complementary means that, so complementary here, this word means that the angles have a sum of 90 degrees. That means when you add the two angles, you get 90 degrees. So based off of these two statements, me using my logic to decide, okay, adjacent angles, they form a right triangle. That means they're stuck together, and they form a right angle. Sorry, it's a triangle. As they're touching, they're forming 90 degrees. So that means if I were to actually take those two angles and add them up together, I would actually get 90 degrees, which means that these two angles are in fact complementary. So using logic, we can decide that, hey, you know what? That these two angles are complementary, which means this is a true statement. And we're using logic to determine whether or not this conditional is true or false. Again, this is an idea behind deductive reasoning. So I hope this short video has helped you sort of determine what the difference is between deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. This is just an introduction video, okay? If you want to look more examples on how to use deductive reasoning, you're going to want to watch these next two videos, which are on the law of detachment and the law of syllogism, which both have to do with deductive reasoning. This video was just to give you an idea of the different types of thinking processes and reasoning that you find between inductive and deductive reasoning. So definitely watch these next two videos to get a better understanding of how to use deductive reasoning. Once again, just want to thank you for watching this one, and hopefully you tune into the next two.